Commander, what are all these children doing here?
I lured them here with the promise of squeaky sand.
Squeaky sand?
Kids love playing in sand.
Sir, are you having a stroke? Should I call a doctor?
We need them, comrade. We need them to crack the Konami code.
Oh shit, I have to call an ambulance.
All day long, they build the squeaky sand up and up, only to tear it down, all the way down. Then they hurl clumps of it to the left and to the right. Then again, to the left and to the right. It's maddening. I don't know what it means. You have to tell me what it means.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another dispatch from outer heaven in this, the year of Metal Gear, in which I, Commander Nicholas Tyson, and my Lieutenant, Lauren Ash. Lauren, address the fine people out there.
Lauren Ash reporting for duty.
All right. In fact, you guys should know that Lauren saluted very like she jabbed that shit into her face.
I was raised in a military house. I know exactly what an American salute looks like. If I'm ever spy, what a British salute looks like. It's the case those,
okay.
Old tensions ever come back.
Okay, simmer down, soldier. All right, so today we are going to be discussing installment 2 in the Metal Gear series. Well, okay, I'll get to that in a second. For purposes of canonicity, it is technically installment 2 in the Metal Gear series, which is Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake. Okay, asterisk, now going down to the footnotes. So footnote 1. So this is technically not the first sequel to Metal Gear. It is actually the second sequel to Metal Gear. The first sequel to Metal Gear was one that was released only in North America. Okay, so this is really convoluted. It was made by a Japanese team at Konami, but it was only released in North America in Europe, and it was called Snake's Revenge. And Snake's Revenge, which we may discuss in a very far future episode when we sort of like go back and cover some of the things that were like not directed by Kojima, was essentially Konami kind of like reining back in the Metal Gear concept to what they wanted, which was a war game. And so it actually pushes it back towards... So, you know, in the previous episode, I set up this dichotomy between a Konami game like Contra as a war game versus a Konami game like Metal Gear, and how like fundamentally different they are, mostly because Kojima didn't want to make a Contra game. And so in many ways, what Snake's Revenge is, it's a way to take the Metal Gear idea and concept and move it several steps back towards Contra. It has a lot more like run and gun elements, like you start the game with all of your weapons. It has not none, but it has very little of the like you have to go around and backtrack thing to find like various items that you will need to move forward. And then when you move forward, you realize you have to go back to get this other thing, and sort of like that back and forth motion that is characteristic of the Metal Gear series under Kojima is not here. It's a very linear game. And I only want to mention it because Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake is in many ways Kojima's reaction to it, or at least that's the lore. Like the lore explanation for what happened, and this is what Kojima himself has said, is that he saw this game, Snake's Revenge, and was like, crap. I've got to make another one of these games. Because I've got to, like, if they pulled it back that way, then I've got to pull it back towards me and my sort of more, if not anti-war, then like war ambivalent posture, because that is what's going to characterize especially like the Metal Gear Solid games. And it's also an attempt by Kojima to now take possession of a series that, prior to this was just a single one-off game. And
Yeah.
this is the moment when it's really going to become a thing, and it's going to become Kojima's thing.
And so, and definitely in kind of keeping in line with the theme that we're trying to pervade throughout, like the through line, you could say, of this kind of year and change series, is really about talking not just about, say, the social commentary that you find within the Metal Gear franchise, but really like kind of the state those games were made in the point in time in which they were made. So it's
Yeah.
both about the history of the world, the history of games, right, and game technology that was happening there, but also like if this type of kind of creative direction kind of philosophy that happens with an IP that's owned by, right, a larger publisher, that's owned by a company, you could say, rather than saying owned by an individual. Like Kojima had to do it within the company, and very likely on working on other titles, was then kind of had to politic his way over. So I would say that, like, while I have no idea about the lore and I don't know Kojima personally, and I sure as like crap haven't read all of the articles, right, that a lot of like Kojima fans I'm sure have, right, to kind of get to this deep lore kind of like tomb of knowledge. But what I would say and what I would argue and hear is that this is already happening like in a lot of other well-established franchises.
Yeah.
From like what type of gameplay do we have here to what type of stories do we tell within the games, right? Like Words of the Coast is a great example because they did in the Game Awards just a launch, like a new title that was pretty much a very sexy cinematic called Words of the Coast, like Warlock. And like,
Yeah.
nobody knows what it's about, but we do all know that it's about a warlock, and it's probably the warlock from Dungeons and Dragons, like it's the Dungeons and Dragons universe. And we
Yeah.
all know what warlocks do. So like there's this sense of like we know what to expect, and yet we also will be surprised, right? And I think that's what, when we get to kind of things about sequels or we get to things about franchises, and that it's really easy as for us to now to talk about, well, this is what a Metal Gear game is. But like it's not easy in the moment when you are looking at the birth of a franchise to talk about what makes that game, right, that type of franchise or that type of game. What are its distinct qualities? So I am really excited to dig into it because if this is a response to a game which did not have this creative direction, right, you're actually going to kind of see more, right, some commentary in this title that I think that you definitely saw in the previous one, right, which played it a little bit safe, if you remember our past episode. But then you'll actually see him kind of starting to develop that voice here.
Yeah, and well, voice in two senses, because like there's the Kojima lore of his person, but then there's also the lore of like the games and how it evolves over time. And that lore, as Lauren noted, lore that Lauren noted, in
I
Metal Gear,
My name is just like a whole planet in of itself now.
yeah, Lauren. Actually, oh god, it's gonna be stuck in my head now. Anyway, so getting back to the actual topic of the episode, the lore in Metal Gear 1987 is pretty perfunctory. Like, there's not a ton of dialogue. The dialogue is very, I guess you could say, functional. It's not telling you a ton, at least not until the end of the game. Whereas in this game, like, the conversations that you have with characters, both over the transceiver and in person, like, there is very clearly a narrative through line that is being developed for the things that you're doing in the game, rather than just some like, oh, contact this person to get information about how to fight this boss, which is really kind of what you got in Metal Gear. And with that, so like that's the story side of the equation. On the gameplay side of the equation, Metal Gear 2 really sort of establishes most of the fundamentals of what will be like the stealth formula for like stealth gameplay. And the reason why I say this is because it is this, especially for Japanese developers, it is this game more than any other that they turn to sort of as the like the foundational, I guess you could say, urtext for how to do stealth action gameplay. And whereas a lot of the like individual mechanics were present in Metal Gear, here it is developed more into like an entire gameplay system where the mechanics sort of feed into a very clear concept of how they're all supposed to interact with one another.
I'm glad you brought up the word systems because I think that like it's really easy for us to think about gameplay and in terms of the things we're actually doing on the sticks, like that core moment to moment. But truthfully, I think that where Metal Gear had a bunch of really good like mechanics and kind of moment to moment engagement, particularly for me as well, like even having to go back to that game, as frustrating as these old games for me are to play.
Yeah.
Um, I think they would have been frustrating even as a kid too. Is the thing like I
Oh, they
really like
were. Don't get me wrong. I played
yeah.
Metal Gear. I never played. Well, I played Metal Gear 2 when I was in college through a ROM, but Metal Gear for the like Nintendo Entertainment System, I played when it was released, and that game fucking sucked. Like, it was really
Okay.
annoying to play.
Yeah, no, I definitely, yeah. And also, guys, I have a bit of a cold. And so if my voice is a little bit scratchy, that is why. I'm hoping it's just giving a nice, like, husky quality to my timbre.
I'll fix it in
Uh,
post. I'll make you sound really good.
oh, great. Super, super husky. Um, no, what I was going to say is I think that's something that's really, really key here is that now this, because all of the fundamental mechanics have already been done, this is what we see in game sequels or used to see in game sequels a lot. In that, when an original IP was established, kind of the first showed kind of the qualities that you would want to see in the game.
Yeah.
Assassin's Creed is a great penultimate example of this because Assassin's Creed, the first one, really does suck. No offense to Assassin's Creed and that team. It obviously was really good. It told an immaculate story and it had a really kind of deep meta narrative plus, right, the in fiction world that you were embodying. And, you know, it really hooked players. But like the controls were really janky. Everything was just not quite finessed yet. And then in
Yeah.
Assassin's Creed 2, yes, albeit it was still a little janky, right, compared to more, you know, typical titles, but everything was a lot smoother. The animations were smoother. The run cycle was smoother. You being able to hide from people, most notably, was a lot better. There were more
Yeah.
ways to hide. There were more ways to get out quickly. There was more of that dynamic, like being able to grab onto a like an item and actually animate to it. I say item, but I meant like roof or ladder, right? And then you'd
Yeah.
be able to get out. And there was a lot ability to like recover from your mistakes that we see in stealth games now, that recovery moment, right?
Yeah.
And that recovery is not a mechanic. The recovery beat is a system. And
Yeah.
so the reason why I'm bringing up Assassin's Creed is so many of us, right, are thinking of, since we're already in the stealth genre, it also just happens to be this is what the sequel is. But so it's really nice and interesting here to think about how while Metal Gear was like, this is the first opportunity you have for stealth and it's you're a cardboard box. Yes, there's some levity there, but also let's really dig into like how did these systems right now that we've got the fundamental mechanics down, how do these added layer of systems and Kojima sequel really kind of make those mechanics kind of shine?
Yeah, a good example of this is actually how movement is treated in the game. And actually the cardboard box is what makes me think of this. Because even in the original Metal Gear, like the cardboard box is something that actually has to make you rethink how you move. Because the whole point is you move while someone is not looking in your direction, but then when they are, you stop. And this idea of like rethinking the motion through the screen in relationship to other game systems, namely like the I guess you could say the vision arcs of the NPCs. Like that is actually then built upon in this game, the whole idea of like rethinking movement, because in this game you have crouch movement in addition to regular movement, in addition to things like the cardboard box. And not only that, but also when you're crouch moving, you can do different things in the game. Like, for example, in the minefield, if you want to remove the mines and pick them up rather than just avoid them, you have to crouch move up to them. And that is what like facilitates this. And this idea, like you see it in games all the time now, where, for example, like in a game, if you want to perform a sneak attack and say like, you know, and I guess you could say like a third person like action game, you have to be like in a crouch stance of some kind or some like slow moving stance. Like that concept originates all the way back here.
Yes.
The whole idea that like the way you move now transforms how you play, even in like the same environment. Like Kojima didn't necessarily invent this concept, but this is really where it's sort of being refined and worked into sort of like a totalizing concept. And in addition to that, another system that is built up on top of that is the way in which the scanner works in game. In Japanese, it's actually called a radar. It's called a personal radar. But the idea,
I thought it was called the radar in
I think well, because the problem is also like in the MSX version that was translated, it's still called radar, but I think
But in my
it's called
version, it's also
scanner
called
in.
the radar.
Oh, okay. Well, then
That's fine. It doesn't matter. Oh my
Anyway,
gosh.
the
It's
thing
almost
that
like
lets you see
a
9
translated
screens.
game because it's not originally in English. Who knew?
The thing that lets you see 9 screens, essentially.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you can see the details of the screen that you're on, but then you can see limited information for all of the screens that surround it. And so with that, you can then plan out your movements more effectively because you can see guard positions and you can account for that in terms of like how you're going to enter the next screen, at what point on the next screen you're going to enter it, and you can be more thoughtful about your movements. Additionally, when you are detected, that screen goes away. And it forces you to rethink how you're moving now again, because you don't have that added information.
Yeah.
And like that is a system, like all of those things working together, that is a system. Lauren is 100% correct here. It's not a mechanic.
Yeah, no, and I think what I love about the systems there too, right, is that even if we looked at it from an engineering standpoint, that they're all 3 totally different systems, right? You've got enemy AI that's say it's completely different than the scanner, right, or the radar. My gosh.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Right, and it's just speaking to this other system that goes, hey, every time I move, draw a white dot, right? And then the other system is like, okay, every time I see a white dot, I draw the white dot, right? It's the radar. And I know these two are interwoven actually in code, but let's for practical purposes, right? Like they're different. And then now that let's just say for positing's sake, right? And the third system is obviously the player system. When I receive input, move the red dot because this is the difference, right? It's on the radar. You're the red dot, right?
Yeah.
I actually quite like this visual because in modern games, I'm the white dot. All the enemies are red. Red shows up clearer. I'm supposed to, destroy red dots, right?
Yeah.
And I really, really love this inverse here because 1, I didn't realize it was ever inversed, like to begin with, right? But 2 is that at some point in the history of game development, we will get to quite later, is that we've changed it. We've made these other people the enemy, right? And I think what's really, really humanizing here is technically we're the red dot. We're the infiltrator, right?
Oh,
and
yeah.
I think something really powerful in that. And the reason why I'm connecting this kind of power to the systems is that what makes you have that power is that systemic knowledge of the screen. But I think the reason why these retro games now, in today's retro being in lots of scare quotes here, less what we would have considered less immersive, I would say 5 to 10 years ago, game experiences are becoming more and more prevalent in today's society. It's because in a way they are almost more immersive. What do I mean by this? What I mean is that we've talked a lot about mechanics, the systems, the movement, right? What I want to posit here is that the aesthetics of the display of these different actions are what actually leads us to the movement of the player's eyes in a more natural way to what it would be like if we were actually infiltrating. So for example, my next stealth mechanic, and I say stealth very loosely here, is going to be Fallout's Pip-Boy that you have on your wrist. But the original Fallout has it displayed on the screen at all times. What you actually usually bring up is that you have to bring up the map on your display. And then, Fallout used to be an old game, guys. And then you close the map, okay? And then you go into your next screen, and then you are starting to traverse. And every time you need to see something, you've got to pull up your map. Now, what does it do? It actually forces you to no longer engage with the enemies. When you go into a Fallout, say Fallout 4 or Fallout New Vegas, now you bring up the Pip-Boy on your arm, and it's kind of the same, right? It's that I've got to look at something to plan my next attack. What I think is really or attack or strategy or where I'm going next. What I think is really interesting about the Metal Gear games is that Fallout, by contrast, is slowing you down. But Metal Gear, it's almost speeding you up. You're going, oh my gosh, I know where they are, and I am consciously able to slow down, but if I need to just run through this, I can. And that's what I talk about when I talk about the power and the strategy and something that is actually more immersive. Because think about it. If you were really an elite operative, you probably wouldn't and let me bring up my wrist animation and let me look at my wrist and then let me take down the wrist animation, right? And I think that's really interesting because we always praise these games for being so diegetic, so immersive, so in the moment that quite frankly, even a simple screen, I think, that's just always constantly, right? The minimap gets so much hate in modern games, right? But I think the minimap serves this interesting purpose of being like that sixth sense that players and also you in the real world would have of, oh, I can't hear the enemy footsteps, but I can see the enemy on my radar. But in real world, I would hear the enemy footsteps. And you don't have the hearing the enemy footsteps and auditory things in these older games, right? So I
Yeah,
think
that's
that
true.
the reason why I'm bringing all this up, right? I mean, if the reason was not clear, to make the point even clearer, right, is to show that this type of diegetic immersion, right, that we are trying to get to, and the way we're using the term diegetic now in modern AAA 3D titles,
Yeah,
to say,
everything's like
you know,
in universe.
world,
Everything happens
in
in universe.
universe,
Yeah.
is that I think that the aesthetics of these older, you know, mini map screens, and then now even newer mini maps, right, I think they get a bad rap because, quite frankly, I think those actually are more emulaic, if I can use that as not a real word. Emblematic is the word, everyone. And then emulate is the other word. I smooshed them together as I am to do
Emulaic.
here.
I like that emulaic.
And I think that's something that's a little bit more kind of closer to, I think, like that kind of humanistic experience. And I wanted to talk about the aesthetics there because the mini map
Yeah.
and the idea of seeing where your enemies are, I mean, is not once again, like Nicholas said, Kojima did not invent this. Mini maps were around way before,
Yeah.
okay, Metal Gear, just so we're all super clear. But as a director or as a designer, you look at other games and you go, what am I going to put into mine that would make the most sense? And he put in the radar, right?
So this is really fascinating. I like the idea that, like, in many ways, like having a lot of diegetic animations for things is actually getting in the way of the gameplay experience being more engrossing. I don't want to say necessarily immersive, but definitely engrossing. Because this is where, if we're going to talk about the way in which like these games relate to their like historical context in terms of other games, interestingly, then the thing you would want to look to is not console games, like either contemporary ones or even more modern ones. You'd actually want to look to contemporary PC games, because if you think about especially like RPGs like, you know, the Eye of the Beholder series or like Ultima Underworld, these or even games like System Shock,
Mhm.
the sort of the original immersive sims
Yeah.
were doing exactly what Lauren is talking about. You don't, in other words, the immersive sim, strangely enough, in its original conception, had a lot of other shit on the screen. And that was kind of by design, because the whole point is that the gameplay experience is supposed to be one of like total awareness, almost like hyper awareness. You're aware of like your position, everything that's in your inventory, what all the cardinal directions are. You have a mini map, you have the like, in those games, the sort of rudimentary like 3D perspective, and all of that is smushed together onto one screen. Whereas in the modern version of that, all of that other stuff is like embedded in menus that you either have to pull up like extra diegetically, or, as Lauren noted, sometimes even diegetically.
Right.
And the loss of that sense of like the immersive experience is something that you can think of like in tactical or strategic terms, rather than something that's just like the visual perspective is everything and we have to maintain it at all cost. Like, that is a radical shift, and it's maybe a loss. And this game, I think, as Lauren correctly pointed out, points to why that in fact maybe was a loss.
Yeah. I think it is a loss. I think that, but I also, and I guess my point though is like, so even though like, you know, or even though I say that, I think it is a loss, but I think we're going to see the return of it. But I also think it's
Possibly.
right.
Yeah.
And if we don't see the return of it, there's a reason why the minimap persists. Yes. Uh, I'm pro
Well, yeah,
minimap,
or the HUD, like the HUD
right?
as sort of like the legacy of that.
The HUD is absolutely a legacy, right? And the HUD
Yeah.
being heads up display, but everyone knows what just in case, just in case.
Yeah, we should
Um,
defend it.
but like I think the HUD is such a it's a fascinating thing. And the reason why I know I want to talk about this as well is because we wanted to bring up another really popular game that is
Oh yeah.
incredibly immersive in a sort of there is no real map way, and it has that extra diegetic. But right before we get into that,
Okay.
I really did want to talk a little bit about stealth and the way the enemies behave around you, Nicholas. So we talked a lot
Oh,
about the
yeah, yeah.
movement, right?
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about these systems, and I wanted to bring up those aesthetics. But now I really want to get to that interconnected relationship between you as the radar and you using that and how you enter a screen, like you rightfully said.
Yeah.
Because hot damn, something else I think is a loss from old stealth games is that I am tired of the immersive sim, like, and I say immersive sim, that's not quite true because Deus Ex Mankind Divided does a great job of this. And what I'm about to say, which is the levity and the lightheartedness of stealth, is that in Deus Ex Mankind Divided, just so everyone's clear, and like bless all of the Eidos people that have worked on that game, who are no longer working on that game, who like just everything in the general universe. I'm like doing a little seance for all of you. Or like, good luck, Richard.
Lauren is literally doing woo-woo hands right now.
I am doing woo-woo hands, right? Because we are all in this, timeline together. We need to get through it. But in the Metal Gear Solid 2, this is what we're calling the true sequel. I love to enter screens, and then I will enter a screen without the guard. But there are so many ways that if the guard is not facing you directly, he doesn't see you. And so I just, quite frankly, walk past him.
Yeah.
Now, you can obviously crouch this way, but it's because crouch is it feels a little wider to me. He'll notice me when I'm on the floor more often than if I'm just walk past him real straight. And I think that's hilarious. And the reason why I say it is because it's like, I really wanted to screenshot this, but it was way too short of a screen cap, Nicholas. Is it literally, I am like right behind a guy facing the other way because I just ran past him. As the timer on my radar goes out to say, like, I have evaded correctly, and it's just like, he's not here. And I am literally right behind him. And I busted out laughing. Like, I almost had to pause the game. Like, I almost got caught because I just died. And I feel like modern stealth games are like, if you're anywhere within their window, they've got a viz cone on their backs. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, okay. Then this reminds me of a boss I want to talk about, which is the Running Man boss, which is to me one of the most fascinating bosses in the history of video games. So this guy you first see only as a white dot moving down through like your scanner / like radar until he appears on the screen. You can't move at this point because it's a scripted event. And then you go through all the dialogue with him and he's like, ooh, I haven't even worked up a sweat yet. And it's just like the way the guy talks is infinitely funny to me. But his whole deal is like, I can run super fast. You're not going to catch me. I'm going to run here. I'm going to run here. And like he even does a and then he does a literal demonstration of his running pattern, which you have to take, since you can't move, you have to note as a pattern on your radar first in order to be able to tell what he's doing. And then the whole point of that thing is that you don't actually chase him. The correct way to defeat him is just to lay down a bunch of mines in his path and he'll run right over them. And it always gets me. Like, it's hilarious. Like every because because it reminds me of the fight with the tank in Metal Gear where it's just like, oh, I'm going to fight a tank. And you shove mines in front of it. And it keeps driving over it because like, that's kind of silly. That is a little silly. And also the characters' names like Running Man and Black Ninja, they just have ridiculousness.
Yes. So on this point of levity, like what I absolutely love is that it is absurd. And I think absurdism does lend itself to kind of lightheartedness. But I think what's really interesting is when we really dial in on the systems and the narrative like of the game, like once again, I feel like the levity is you are an all-powerful operative, right? Like you are the best of the best. And I think the lightheartedness kind of plays into that.
I disagree. I think I think the Running Man example shows this, is that what Kojima is doing. Hey, do you remember there's a scene in, I believe it's Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Indiana Jones is in this like, I don't know, some Middle Eastern village. And then this guy approaches him and he's got these two giant scimitars and he starts swinging them. He's like, in this like incredible display of swordsmanship. And Harrison Ford pulls a revolver out of its holster, points at him, shoots the guy dead and walks away. And it is one of the funniest moments because the thing is like, it's not about Indiana Jones being like the great, he's SEAL Team 6, he's a total operator, he's Indiana Jones. No, that's not what he's doing there. What he's doing is like, I am smarter. Like, I recognize what's
Okay.
going on. I
Yeah,
assess
so
the situation. That's not a superpower. That's being clever.
yeah, but
And
I'm
the
not saying
cleverness
like
then
I
feeds
see,
into
I
the
see.
levity.
Yeah. No, I think we're actually more similar than you give me credit for. And that like I
Okay.
talk about power
Well,
fantasy in
yeah.
terms of like the player wants to feel a certain way about being an
Oh, okay. I
operative.
see what you're saying. I got it. Okay.
Right? Yeah. And so actually though, like, no. But here's the part where I didn't consider was that the scimitar moment in Indiana Jones is meant to be funny. And I think
Yes.
that like and like what I was thinking of was like, oh, I feel like we've lost something by not having boss encounters like this. And I think it is true that like, what I'm saying is what we've lost is that we've lost those moments of comic relief in stealth games that like for me, I was systemizing it. I was like, I think there's little moments of comic relief everywhere. Like if I can just walk past a guy, this is hilarious. I can't believe I 100% stealth this mission. You were right there. But when we look at like modern stealth games, I find that when I talk about the Viz cone on the back, I feel like there's this moment where, what is it? It's even, we were just playing something like, anyway, I can't remember the title of it, but like even like in modern kids games now, like if you get too close to someone, they're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I see you because like you're behind me." And I'm like, quite frankly, like in real life, like Rob just walks behind me to like put the dish in the sink, and I'm like screaming because I'm like, "Where did it come from?" Like no one has a Viz cone on their back, okay?
Yeah.
Like, and I just think that it's like, that's the classic trope, right? Mom always has the eyes in the back of her head, right? Because it's like, what are you doing? How do you know that I'm here? And it's because you're a child and children are loud, okay? Like you do not know how to control your footsteps, 6-year-old. And so
Yeah.
I think that it's like, and then you grow up and you learn to walk quieter and then you start to scare your mom, right? Because now you've
Yeah.
learned self-control about the footsteps. And I think that it's just, sorry, like that's like a real world example to kind of frame this problem I have with modern gaming's like area or radius of kind of like people will see you versus like in an immersive sim like as modern as Deus Ex Mankind Divided, right? Which
Yeah.
is relatively modern compared to Metal Gear Solid, like Metal Gear 2,
Yeah.
is that they don't notice you. And I think it is interesting that you mentioned that it's an immersive sim thing, but I found it very funny that I could walk past guards like behind them. And as long as I don't hit them or the cameras, it's perfect. I'm like, yes, I did it. And you can kind of do something similar in Assassin's Creed as well with if I sit behind next to these two people on a bench, though I look totally, totally out of place in any period in Renaissance Europe or in the Middle East. I look like they don't notice me because I'm sitting between two people on a bench. I was
Yeah.
systemizing it, but I actually like the boss argument better. So I went on a tangent there about the systems
No,
approach to it.
I think they are the
But
same thing though, because
yeah,
when you bring up the fact that like if stealth gameplay is going to be something that works in your game and it's something that you want your game to focus on, you actually do have to have the ability to 100% completely evade someone. Because if you don't, then it's just kind of like arbitrarily forcing you into combat mechanics that are, and I think Kojima understands this, antithetical to that form of gameplay. Now, Kojima's games always give you the choice. You can do either. Like you can shoot the guard or you can sneak past them. He doesn't really he doesn't compel you to do that. But the thing is, like, the more you make the various aspects of stealth gameplay impossible to achieve, the more it's just like, okay, well, I'm going to put all my points into long guns and I'm just going to shoot you from a distance so that way I don't have to fucking deal with it. Like, because
yeah,
that's the way I sometimes feel playing like the Outer Worlds games where stealth is fun, but it's also annoying. And so it's just like, wait, but I can just like, I can just headshot you from like 1,000 meters and then I don't have to deal with all the things that are annoying. And I think that's the problem. If you don't fundamentally understand that about stealth gameplay, which like, for example, Cyberpunk 2077 understood, like definitely understood, that aspect of it really has to be dialed in perfectly. And like, this isn't a perfect game. Like Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, it's not a perfect game, but it is trying to dial that aspect in as tightly as it can. Because on the one hand, if it's too loose, if like you can do anything, then like the tension of the stealth experience isn't there. But if you make it too impossible, then it's just like, well, why would I even bother doing this? I'm just going to like load up on ammo and I'm just going to shoot everybody because that's easier. And like finding where that dividing line is and sort of like riding that razor thin edge is extremely difficult. And the games that do it should get like infinite praise precisely because that's the kind of really tenacious design work that I personally feel doesn't get enough credit, because like it's highly technical, it's highly specific, and it's also very much, it's not only technical, it's also focused on what the experience of the player is. And if you can do that, if you can both think in technical terms and how the player is going to respond to it, like that is a good fucking designer right there. Right there.
No, and I think like it also lends itself to like why you'd want that comic relief as well. Because I think that like these games can be so tense and can get so anxious, especially if you are doing the stealth route. You're constantly in that kind of fight and flight stage. And so the reason why I like your boss argument is that Running Man is hilarious. Like I had mines. I also, because I was following a guide. So the guide was like, you need to stock up on mines. And I was like, oh, I wonder why. But then as soon as I saw Running Man and I was like, saw the pattern, I was kind of like, oh my goodness, like this is dumb. And you also mentioned in Metal Gear where you have the tank and you just put the mines in front of it as well. I think that's idyllic is what I was going to say. That's not correct. The idea is that it's something very smart. It's very clever, but it's also like the enemy is very dumb, like, and or the enemy is kind of more reactive. Like the enemy is already in a tank. The only thing he can do is fight you in a tank. He has no idea you would put mines under it, right? Yeah. And that is kind of like what you would see in a movie. It's like, no, I'm doing the mines. Same with the Running Man, though the Running Man is pure comic relief, I feel.
Well, I think there is a similarity there, because like in both cases, in both the tank and the Running Man, the enemy that you're fighting is portrayed as something who is really powerful, really strong, and really adept. And what you do in defeating them is actually revealing their limitations. In other words, conceptually, they think they're like bad as hell. Like they think they're the most amazing shit on the planet. But what you are doing as the player is actually demonstrating that, like, no, actually, you're so caught up in your own bullshit. And the reason why I bring this up is because there's a thematic resonance here. You're so caught up in your own bullshit that you actually don't see your own inadequacies. And that is a theme that runs throughout the Metal Gear series, where you have these characters who are hyper fixated on some aspect of like war or themselves or something. And that their inability to see past that then leads to their downfall. And the fact that like this is in the gameplay, like that's really fucking smart.
Yeah, it's really smart. It's really clever, right? And I think also this is like a really great segue into like, I told you guys we were going to get to social commentary. Yeah. Right? Like I told you guys this was going to happen. You saw this from last episode, but like, and I just think that the social commentary that are within, that pervades all gameplay, right? Not just in this game, but in all of the games that we see kind of that we all love, that we all kind of resonate. Like it's that type of social commentary that gets us to kind of look out into the world and go, oh, this is a phrase, this is a moment, this is something that I can take with me now. Right. Yeah. And you only really get that if you have that kind of social resonance by kind of bringing something out from outside of yourself or outside of the world and bringing it into something that you're creating. Yeah. Right. And so before this does sound like we're just a Metal Gear Solid 2, like woo woo thing, I just do want to remind everybody that like it's these types of experiences you find throughout all of the games. But I think like not just the Metal Gear franchise, you can find it in everything. Yeah. But I do think there is something special when you kind of go, why does this game kind of give like, it gives me a tick. It gives me that itch to just play it, to kind of keep going. Why am I frustrated? But also it makes you go, why is there a Running Man? And like questions, like whenever you get to ask a question about a game experience, I'm very curious by nature. I ask questions. Most of my show notes are just like, why is this a thing? Why are we here? Why did this exist? Like that's all of my notes, right? No statements, just like questions, or like, why don't we do more of this, right? Or why don't we do this at all? Like, you know, in the negative form. So I think it's been really interesting to like play older games like this. And I also think that this is a perfect segue into kind of a newer game that also makes not just really good social commentary, but something that is now what started our year or my year, because it's one of the first games I played of this year. And and now is also ending the year. So Nicholas, why don't you?
So we're going to be talking about a little game I'm sure none of you guys have heard of, because Lauren and I we're such hipsters. We only play like the coolest niche games in existence. It's a little game, little French game. made by exactly 33 people and not hundreds of contractors. It was only made by 33 people,
Yep.
as we all know. And
We
that
all know.
game is Clair
Not
Obscur.
doing social commentary on here on our podcast. Sorry, I
And
totally interrupted you. Please
I'm gonna
say the
okay.
title
So
again.
it's the fucking game of the year. It's Clair Obscur Expedition 33.
Woo!
And
And we are super happy, by the way. Like, congratulations to everybody on the team.
Yeah.
All 33 plus like 3,300 of you. Not 3,300, that'd be a lot. But the other 300, because I do believe the final total developer count, like outsourcing and internal, was like, I think was around 300 developers.
Yeah, it was several hundred
Several
people.
hundred, similar to Larian for Baldur's Gate 3 as well.
Well, the reason why, so like even we're not just doing a clickbaity thing where it's like, oh, they're going to talk about Clair Obscur because it's super popular and everybody loves it now.
Statements here. No. This is actually really important because we were playing this game and we really were looking at it through this lens, right? Of what is a total and complete game experience.
Yeah, so we've already talked about this before. We talked about the fact that like our take on Clair Obscur was that it is functionally like this total work of art, which I am now going to characterize in operatic terms, because one of the things that characterized especially like late 19th, early 20th century opera was this idea that it's like you got the acting, you got the music, you got the art, you got like the visual spectacle on the stage. All of the arts are working together to create this one total experience inside of a theater. And this is a game that has that similar operatic quality where like it's hitting on every single cylinder. Like the music by itself is a fucking masterpiece. That on top of really incredibly engaging gameplay, an incredible story with extremely interesting, deep philosophical themes. Just so many things, and we've already talked about them, so go back and listen to that episode. But the reason why I bring this up is because I wanted to contrast that like total gameplay experience with what we're seeing here with Metal Gear 2, which I have tentatively identified as a sort of more paranoic style of gameplay. Now, what do I mean by that? So paranoia in its like most basic sense refers to a tendency for sort of like the mind to be all over the place, but to be all over the place in like a highly suspicious way. And so when we were talking earlier about how like if you just look at the surface that you're looking at, the screen, and all of the things that are being communicated to you simultaneously, both like you have the screen that Snake is on at that moment and everything that's on it. You have the radar that's indicating like limited information on what's on the other screens. You have like another section of the screen that's indicating like your primary weapon and how much ammo there is. And then you have another section that is indicating like what your secondary equipment that you have equipped is. All that information is there. And the fact that like, but all of it sort of points into different directions. And that's what I mean by it being kind of paranoid, because the para and paranoia literally means to sort of like to be around or to be about in the vicinity. And there's this idea that like information in this game is like constantly surrounding you and sort of like your gameplay efforts and like how you engage with it. And sort of like then the personal suspicion that you bring not only to sort of like actually a good example of like suspicion as gameplay. One of the common things that you'll see throughout the Metal Gear series is this idea that you can, in the initial games, you can punch a wall to see where you can go through, or in later games, it'll be like a tap that you can do in the wall. That's what the Metal Gear Solid games do. And you use that to identify the section that you can either punch in the original Metal Gear or in later iterations that you blow up with plastic explosives. And so like that thing, that idea that sort of like you see a thing that looks solid, but then you have to treat it in a different way in order to sort of like reveal something fundamental about it. Like that is a paranoid gameplay style.
Yeah. And this is, sorry. If I can just butt in here really quickly, just because this is actually one of the moments where, and I say one of the moments, like this is very rare. But honestly, like this is where I really disagree with the word paranoia when it comes to kind of gameplay design.
Okay.
Because for me, I really love operatic. I do absolutely think that for those, just so we can break down the word etymologically here, as I intend to do, there is operatic. It does come from opera, but also this is the same Latin root word of opus. And a lot
Yeah,
of
a
you are
work.
going,
Yeah,
oh,
a
the
thing.
magnum opus, aka the thing of my life, right?
Yeah.
Right? Your modus operandi, right? The thing that you are going by. Yes, guys, Latin is everywhere. Hooray. But when we look at operatic, right, we look at this total complete experience. I think that like it does it a disservice to try to contrast Clair Obscur and Metal Gear. Man, I keep calling it Metal Gear 2, but I keep wanting to say Metal Gear Solid because of all the other works that come after this one.
Yeah, that's going to get confusing because
And
then
this is
there'll
going to
be a
get
Metal
super
Gear or Metal Gear
confusing.
Solid 2.
I
Yeah.
know. This is going to get so confusing, guys, and we're here for the ride, so let's keep going. So I think it's a little bit unjust to say that Clair Obscur is operatic and then Metal Gear, this one that we are currently reviewing today, is more paranoiac, though I totally see what you're saying with there's all the elements beyond you as a human, right?
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Versus in Clair Obscur, there is more of that. Everything that is within you as a human is the only thing you have as you're exploring the space. Like there is no
Okay.
mini map. There is no directionality. Like there is no kind of sense of north, south, east, west. I guess you could use the position of the sun / lighting, but even that changes kind of throughout.
Yeah, you do eventually get
Right.
a map in the
And you do
sense of
eventually get a map because you have an overworld.
Yeah.
And you do have I was about to call underworld. That's not correct. You do have an overworld, right?
Yeah.
And I think that in Clair Obscur, you also get a compass that you click and then you'll always see the compass. There is actually north,
Yeah,
south,
that's true.
east,
Yeah.
west.
Yeah.
But I'm saying the position of the sun is not really relative to north, south, east, west, which is
No.
either done intentionally because why would it be, for spoilers, but also like because it doesn't have to be, right?
Yeah.
But also it should be for spoilers as well, because that's how it would be in terms of experience if you have become an experienced person in that certain form. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting too vague here. Point being, I think that everything works in tandem so well.
Yeah.
That to use the word operatic for Clair Obscur, while does make the most sense, I think, because it is, once again, it is game of the year. But guys, it is an incredible feat of everything that when we look at an older game like Metal Gear 2, I don't think it's quite accurate to say it's not operatic simply because it has less, I think, affectations and because it has all of the elements displayed that you have, right?
I see what you're saying. I need to explain this in different terms.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. I don't think the word paranoia is truth, though I do realize the para makes sense, right?
Yeah, it's sort of my tendency to think in things in terms of like etymology, and also like the word in Greek, paranoia in Greek means something slightly different.
It does mean something slightly,
but I don't want to go there. So like to me, the fundamental distinction is that Clair Obscur is, because of that sort of operatic quality, the total like work of art is fundamentally, its gameplay is sensuous. It is about feel as much as anything. And there's a good example of this. And that's literally how, like, say, the dodge mechanic works, the dodge and parry mechanics, where the timing for those is something you really have to experience, and you have to get a literal feel for it in order for the timing to work, because it is more rhythmic than it is sort of like, I have observed when this happens and I know the exact timing, and when the clock hits this number, that is when I press the button. That's not how it works. It's not mechanically how it works.
Okay.
Whereas, comma, in Metal Gear 2 and also in Metal Gear, in fact, pretty much the entire Metal Gear series, it is not sensuous gameplay. It's more like thinky gameplay. It's, you actually do, when we talked about the previous game, one of the things that we mentioned is that one of the things that game is trying to do is it's trying to teach you patience. It's trying to teach you patience, observation, and all of those things are aspects of gameplay that kind of hold you at a distance from what you're observing. It's much more visual. It's much more optic. It's much more, well, I'm using optic in a technical sense.
Yeah.
But the idea is that, like, you are kind of aloof from it, and that the paranoia, what I'm calling paranoia then, is that you need to have this aloofness in order to be able to absorb all of this information that is coming at you from different directions, because all of those things then feed back into the choices that you make in the game. Whereas a game like Clair Obscur, you can actually get through it in its entirety. Like, there is a lot of planning in terms of, like your character builds. But in the actual moment of gameplay, when you're actually like pushing buttons and making decisions in real time, it is much more of a vibe. It is much more reactive in the sense that like you are feeling the flow of what's going on and responding immediately and almost instinctually to it. Whereas what you were doing, at least what I was doing when I was playing Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2, was like paying very close attention to what I saw, what it meant, and what it indicated about what I was supposed to do. And in that environment, I made much more patient decisions. At least I felt I had to. And like a good example of this in Metal Gear 2 is when you're following the Green Beret guy, because you have to follow. It's extremely long and it's super annoying. But the point of that whole encounter is that like you follow him at like enough of a remove, at enough of a distance, so that way each time when he does that sudden turnaround, you don't get caught and like the alert goes off and you have to do all the alert things. And so there's this idea that like you literally hold your avatar in the game at a remove from the object of his and your observation. And that there are so many ways in which this manifests in the game. And that play style, that idea of sort of like close, meticulous, detailed observation and responding specifically to that before you make your gameplay choices, that to me is fundamentally different from the mode you're often in, although not always, often in a game like Clair Obscur, where because it is about the sensuous experience, it's about sort of like the way in which the music fills you, the feelings that you feel, not just in terms of like what the music is doing to you, but also what the story is doing to you. And also the sense of tension that you feel in those like quick time events. Like all of those things are meant to sort of like, it does a different thing.
Yeah. So I've been kind of pondering here with you guys, because I'm sure you've all listened to Nicholas as well, and as I have. And I'm sure you're all forming your own opinions, which is great, please. And I think this almost might be a really great way for us to kind of go into a discussion about what your experiences of playing Clair Obscur and playing, if you've ever played an old Metal Gear game, like Metal Gear 2 specifically, or if you've ever played a Metal Gear game. Because I think that's something that you're hitting on for me, Nicholas, is that I'm not sure, once again, we always talk about these things in terms of dichotomy, and then Nicholas and I always end up agreeing it's a spectrum.
Yeah,
so I'm just going to go ahead and say it's always going to be a spectrum. Yeah. However, even on this, I think you're hitting on something that is more of a play style, because you said at least the way I played, right? And I do think that's true, because I do think that for a lot of players, namely my fiance, they absolutely could run and gun this game. They could absolutely run and gun Metal Gear Solid 2. Yes, they would have to be patient in some places. But like when I have had to hand him the controller, because that Green Beret moment for me was the one where I had to hand him the controller.
Yeah,
I was like, I cannot do this. It's boring. It's painful. I am neurodivergent. And my life is already boring. Oh, yeah,
that's like ADHD hell. Oh, my God.
So like, I can't do it. I cannot do it. I was like, look, this is my life. I am a Green Beret. That is my task. And if it looks at me, I can't do it. But as long as I stay distant from it, I will accomplish it in due time. Okay? So I am playing a game. And I am like, no, the task is the Green Beret. Okay? All my tasks are Green Berets now. Right? And I want a nice red beret filled with sensual baguette. Okay? I just want a nice big piece of bread stuffed to my back, some cheese in my pocket that I can nom on. Okay. That's going to get me through this world. And like, that's true. It's very true, guys. And I get that dichotomy, right? But the way you talk about playing Clair Obscur with its sensualness or its distinctionness, I actually did feel that when I succeed at Metal Gear, is when I do use the radar in a way that just is so instinctual now, where I'm like, I see the white dot, I'm just going to go for it. I don't know which way he's facing, but you know what? Even if he sees me, I'm going to go through it, right? The way that you have to learn to use the cardboard box, because the game doesn't teach you, feels like it becomes instinctual over time. And so that's why I think maybe this is something more of like a play style in terms of like, both of this gameplay exists because both of those have systems, right?
Oh
Clair
yeah,
Obscur
100%. Yeah,
lends
yeah.
itself to a tactics-based approach. I mean, it is kind of semi-tactical with it's turn-based strategy.
It's
right?
turn-based. It's got all the RPG stuff.
It's got all the
yeah,
RPG elements, so there is a semblance of tactics there. Even on story mode, it is not an easy game.
Oh no,
Like
it's
you
pretty hard.
have
Yeah.
to learn how to parry, you have to learn how to dodge, which means you have to observe. You have to understand what the different enemies are doing. You have to, and then you do have to be reactive. So I think that it is
Yeah.
both more of it's a play style approach, but it can also be, right, once again, this is not a game critique podcast. This is a game design podcast. And what this means is that game designers have a way that the games want to be played. So
Yeah.
before we open this up for kind of questions here, which is really interesting, I'd love to have some discussion. Maybe we'll post just this ending part on YouTube or something. And then we'll see if you're hearing this on YouTube, then we obviously did it. But I think what's really, really, really exciting here is that I do think there is a divide. There is a dichotomy in what Nicholas said. And I just wanted to call it out in my notes. And that's the feeling, right, that the opera gives you. It's the rhythm of it, right? The words that we use to describe Clair Obscur and that others do, right, are ones of feeling or of emotion, of purpose. There's a reason for your actions and you feel like you are compelled, right, to do it. I think at any point in time in Metal Gear Solid 2, it's a functional game, right? I functionally, and the dialogue, right, is not, even when you see Holly and you have this really, I guess, kind of cute, meet cute bit where he's like, "Oh, you're prettier than I thought you were." And she's like, "What? You thought I was ugly?" Yes. But it's an old school meet cute. Let's tell it how well it was for the history of that, wherever the 90s. The 90s meet cutes. Guys, it's in all 90s movies. Just go watch anything. And it's, guys like, I thought you would be pretty. You're prettier than I expected. Who you thought was ugly?
You said you were a journalist. I thought you were going to be totally ugly, but you're hot.
Yeah, I mean, stuff like that, right? But also, I think what's interesting too is but then it ends with hey, that's like something you'd say to your boyfriend when you're about to wish him goodbye because you're never going to see him again. Say something different. And she's like, I guess stay alive and I'll see you later. Right? Like that, I think is probably, I know you hate the dialogue and I get that it's it's sexist, but I think that's actually some of the most personality and caring dialogue that we get that's about feeling and not about function in the game. And that's why I'm calling it out, because that dialogue is about evoking an emotion. Even that emotion is rage or upsetness towards why are we treating women this way, which is totally valid. You got a feeling out of it versus everything else Holly says is just like, hey, don't forget there's going to be mines. Oh, hey, the sand makes noise. Yeah. Right? And then you're like, why is the sand makes noise? It's imported.
It's squeaky.
Because it's squeaky, because it's imported from Japan. And I'm like, I don't think Japanese.
Okay, this is a real phenomenon. So
it is a real phenomenon. That's why
it's usually called singing sand.
Yes, singing sand is a real phenomenon, everyone. And so I am going to so we're all here. If you have played Metal Gear 2 and you see the singing sand, or because of this podcast, you go and you play it. Singing sand does exist. It is not a gimmick, but it does feel so gimmicky in the game. So it's like, but that's what I'm trying to say, right? Is most of the dialogue is functional, right? It's not meant to make you feel anything. You're just going to play the game, and playing the game kind of gives you those feelings, right? Versus there is the idea that in later Metal Gear games, we are going to get more, right, emotionally charged dialogue or dialogue says something, right? So I just think it's not as black and white, right? Or as one or the other, as we're kind of saying. So, right, to posit that question right back to you again, guys, now that I've explained it for way too long, is do you feel that Clair Obscur as a game, right? Is it your game of the year? Is it not? Please comment, like, and subscribe. But also, is Metal Gear, right? Maybe the franchise, or if you haven't played Metal Gear 2, is that as in a game because it's a tactics, because it lacks, you could say, emotional dialogue or emotional storytelling, does that make it less of kind of a total or complete kind of sensuous experience for you? Or is it still kind of something very visceral, right, that you kind of remember deep in your bones? And Nicholas, I don't know if that's the best question or the best way to phrase it. So if there's a better way to phrase it, please let's end on that. And then tell the good people where they can find us afterwards.
No, I think that's really good. So if this does end up on YouTube, as Lauren said, please comment and with your response. Additionally, we are going to be discussing more of sort of the geopolitical context for this game and also get a little bit more into its lore in our Patreon episode. You can go to patreon.com/Furidashi. And if you sign up for $5 a month, you not only get access to all of the Year of Metal Gear Patreon episodes, you get access to a fairly large backlog of not only our previous Patreon episodes, but also all of our Furidashi Classroom episodes. I did 3 different series on 3 different topics in game design. Those are all really great. There's playlists for them. You can go listen to them and do whatever you like. And if you want to follow us on social media, Lauren is at Espresso Cat on Blue Sky. I'm at Academicality. If you don't want to make your opinions public, you can maybe even DM us. I would be more than happy to respond to anything anyone has to say. And with that, we will leave you for the time being. We hope to see you on the Patreon episode. But if we don't, we will take you however you are. And we hope you stay safe and have a wonderful end of 2025.